Well, it's been a while, but after finally recovering from a period of me being distracted, lazy, and busy with school work in my degree of becoming a software engineer, I've decided that for the break until the next semester, I'm going to get off my lazy arse and do a countdown. And what countdown that can be? How about just top 10 things that I like in gaming? This is a very personal list. It's not really based off objectively what could be considered the best things in gaming, but more of a top 10 personal things that I just enjoy. Think Josh Scorcher's top 10 things that I like in gaming. Plus, this should be a countdown where it should be easy for me to find footage. That being said, the only rules is that they have to be in a video game. Obviously, those are going to be from games that I have played, or at least familiar with. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started. You know how in most games the single player mode and the multiplayer mode almost feel like completely different games to the point that some people exclusively play one and not the other? Cough! Every single first person shooter on the market! Well, you see, I have two, and to be honest, I don't like that, which is why number 10 is integrated multiplayer. I really like it when the multiplayer is kind of integrated into the single player experience. It helps make the world feel a lot more alive and vibrant, and also it feels like the multiplayer is actually part of the game rather than a second thought. Or in other cases, that the single player was actually part of the game and not a second thought. I'm also going to cheat on this one and also include any type of game where the AI partners also function as a sort of multiplayer partners. You know, as long as the AI is Examples of this include Journey, Dark Souls, and The Last Story, because even though you can't really play with other players in the single player mode, the two modes feel exactly the same, and your AI partners are fairly smart enough that it feels like you're working with a band of brothers rather than just some random people. Number 9. You see, most people play games for fun. And actually, I think everybody plays games for fun at some point. And this next one might be a controversial choice, but I'm choosing survival mechanics. You know, ones where you have to keep track of your hunger, sanity, health, etc., blah, blah, blah. Some people find it a hindrance, and it's not exactly the thing if you're just into like crazy hack and slashes or just crazy arcade style shooters, which is just general mind popcorn fun. However, I kind of feel like the immersion that these elements can bring to a game and how it really connects me with the game world and makes it feel more alive and vibrant rather than just a giant simulated obstacle course. Examples of this include Survival Mode of Minecraft, Don't Starve, and Dwarf Fortress, even though I'm horrible at it, and even though you're not really keeping track of your own survival as so much the survival of an entire civilization. Number 8 is skill growth. You might be thinking it's collecting items like in most Zelda games, you know, go from one dungeon and get a new item. But I'm talking about more of choosing what kind of skills you get, like you do in a lot of other Western RPGs, and in the newest Zelda title, A Link Between Worlds, where you can kind of choose your item mix-up, even though you're kind of only renting items. Some examples include the Elder Scrolls series as well as Fallout when it comes to items and equipment, but one really notable example is Deus Ex. There are literally multiple ways that you can take tackling the challenges. Number 7 is a kind of term that we don't really talk about much in gaming, and the example isn't too common, but at the same time it's not like it's rare either, especially with a bit more modernized interest in it. What I'm talking about is procedural generation. What is procedural generation, you ask? Basically, it's the game randomly generating items, enemies, and all sorts of environmental factors. Survival mode on Minecraft is one example, as is Don't Starve, as well as many roguelikes use procedural generation. Even in RPGs, the random encounter of certain monsters use it to a certain extent. It can be used to add some randomness to the game. However, I'm more impressed when procedural generation is used to generate entire worlds with such factors as whether or not it's possible for you to survive or not, or what kind of monsters, plants, items, animals, etc., blah blah blah, are common in certain areas. It really adds a level of immersion to the game and makes it feel like a living, breathing world as opposed to, say, scripted event. Yeah, I know I repeated myself. You'll be noticing that a lot in this countdown, that a lot of the things that I like in gaming kind of repeat and have some common themes. Do you know what's one thing I like about video games? The ability to immerse yourself in a world. With other forms of media, you're a passive observer, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, games allow you to live that adventure. Instead of seeing what new characters are on screen, you're actually meeting them. Which brings us to number 6, recruitable allies. I like it when you can recruit new characters in a game's universe and incorporate them in the story with their new abilities, personality quirks, and etc., blah blah blah. It's especially impressive when you can actually create relationships with them and your interaction with these characters actually determining the course of the game, which alludes to something I'll be getting back a little later to. Number 5 is relational gameplay. You see, this one kind of goes hand in hand with the latter one. The only reason I put this higher is simply having recruitable allies isn't no good if the allies you recruit are just dumb, mindless bots. That's one of the reasons why when I think of the previous entry, I don't really think of Pikmin. Not that it's a bad game, but when I think of recruitable allies, I think about recruiting Gaius from Fire Emblem Awakening, not pansy flower things that are disposable. Sorry, Pikmin. But anyway, on to relational gameplay. Basically, I define this as any gameplay with humanity elements, like keeping track of the morale of your troops, like in the upcoming Banner Saga, which is probably going to be the best indie game of 2014 when it comes out, and maybe even the best game of the year. Can't wait. Also can refer to any kind of dating sim element. The Fire Emblem series makes pretty good use this, and so does the Persona 3 and especially 4, as well as Xenoblade Chronicles. In fact, it seems like dating sim elements are kind of on a rise in other mainstream games. Number 4, class systems. Now, this might seem counterintuitive to previous entries such as skill growth, but I just absolutely adore class systems where each character has their own strengths and weaknesses because it adds a level of strategy. Often, these two systems might seem counterintuitive to each other, but a certain mixture of the two adds both a level of immersion and individuality. Each character has their own strengths and weaknesses, but at the same time has a certain level of choice. Fire Emblem Awakening is an excellent example of the ability to cycle through different classes to get different abilities, and with each character having a different set of classes. Golden Sun, with its various ability to set dinge to create different class configurations for different characters, is also a great example. These two systems might seem counterintuitive to each other, but I think when they're used together, they really add a lot to the game and can also help with both custom ability and self-expression, but at the same time nitty-gritty strategy. Number 3 is symbolism and lore. This isn't exactly exclusive to gaming. You can find symbolism and lore in any media. The visual nature of video games can really help deliver upon this. True, film and TV offer a similar thing. However, in games we can take them a step further by making the mechanics themselves a metaphor. For example, the entire game journey, mechanically speaking, is a giant allegory for the monomyth or the hero's journey. There's absolutely no pre-scripted dialogue. This also makes use of the aforementioned integrated multiplayer, which I'm not going to go into detail. You can see my entry for Virtual Boy's Top 50 Games for more information on that. However, even if symbolism isn't quite integrated into the mechanics, just making reference to just in-game events and stories themselves, while not exclusive in video games, can make even a normal old game that normally I wouldn't like a linear espionage, suddenly turned into a great masterpiece for me to analyze. Majora's Mask is full of symbolism, as is Xenoblade Chronicles has a bunch of existential themes, but the game that trumps everyone when it comes to symbolism is Xenogears. Heck, on the Gaming Family's top 25 mechanical bosses, my entry was full of symbolism for one boss, and I cut out like 10 extra minutes. And those 10 extra minutes I cut out was the original abridged version. So if my abridged version of explaining symbolism for one boss in one game was too much screen time for those people with short attention spans that watch our channel, then that should really tell you that if you're into symbolism and all sorts of pretentious themes, then you should really get Xenogears on the PSN or pick it up on the original PS1. And I get really upset when people do not have a single pinch of respect and they cannot have their short attention spans be stretched for anything other than Pokemon. Number 2 is crafting and combining. Do you know what's more awesome than finding a bunch of secrets and hidden items? I'll tell you what, finding all the secrets and stuff you can do with it with said hidden items. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. I really love games where when you get the items, that's not the end with them. You can combine them and customize and see all sorts of different combinations you can get. As simple as just putting different types of equipment on RPG heroes, to customizing entire items like finding new alchemy formulas in Ni no Kuni and an Altiller series, to the crafting in Minecraft, to the summons in Golden Sun, to the different class combinations and ability sets, and then having different marriages to create different types of children with slightly altered appearances, mostly in their hair, and different abilities and stats based off the parents that marry them, and then go through it all over again? I mean, just wow. Yeah, customizability and ironing and crafting can really add loads of replay value to a game. You can probably tell by this countdown on now, I'm kind of the analytical fellow that prides himself on pretentious symbolism and all sorts of secrets to discover and just different ways to stretch my mind and creativity. So I wouldn't be surprised that number 1 is numbers. What do I mean by numbers? Well, true, any type of game, since it's written in a programming language, is pretty much written in the language of math. P.S. I'm taking computer courses right now to become a software engineer. Anyway, back on topic. Numbers and stats might be crucial to all games in terms of play, but on the player's end, they're only used in like mostly RPGs and strategy games. But still, I love being able to manipulate the different numbers and stats and seeing how combining them produces different outcomes. It just makes me feel so smart that once I've analyzed and cracked down a system, to be able to do all sorts of fun stuff with it. Now, for the number 0 choice. This last choice might seem a bit broad and cliché. You might argue that it's simply a core part of any type of gaming experience or interactive media, which is the element of agency. But the way I see it, how it's used the way I'm about to describe it, is something that's not really used often in games, and for good reason. It's dang hard! Number 0 is dynamic choice. What do I mean by dynamic choice? Well, as you know, one of the things that separates video games from all other delightful forms of media is player input. You, the player, have a choice. Granted, in some games you don't have too much of choice other than walk forward and kill everything that you see, but still, every single game has some level of choice, some form of agency. You, the player, push the story along, or maybe you could argue that you, the player, are being pushed along, but that's not my point. Anyway, when I say dynamic choice, I mean choices that actually affect the story or how the game falls out. Witcher 2 is an excellent example, as the entire second half of the game will be completely different depending on your actions and choices you make in the first half. The Stanley Parable is another recent indie game example that is a good example of this, while at the same time kind of criticizing your lack of choice. You have a bunch of choices, yet at the same time you feel confined and forced in a certain direction. It just feels like this weird contradiction that gives your head this mind rape feeling where you just don't know what to think about it, where it's part-time terrifying, hilarious, scary, insightful, yet time-wasting all at the same time. Kind of like the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. Hey now, I meant that as a compliment. Get off my back, anime fans. Anyway, plenty of games allow you agency, but my favorite types of games, and one of my favorite elements of gaming, will always be the one where your choices matter, and which is why I love the very few choices you can make in Fire Emblem Awakening, and how units that die and the people you marry affect stats of your children, and also whether or not you get endings. And I love games like Mass Effect and Dragon Age, where you can recruit different characters and also have a choice of their fates and relationships. I'm the White Road figure, and I cannot wait for the Banner Saga to come out on Steam.
Finally, if you begin to wonder if your choices are actually meaningful and whether you'll ever make a significant contribution to the world, just remember that in the vast infiniteness of space, your thoughts and problems are materially insignificant, and the feeling should subside.